Senator Portman and I saw firsthand the extent of the damage inflicted by the Russian invasion. I was troubled to learn that, according to your written disclosures, Twitter's leadership recently considered agreeing to the Putin regime's request to censor and surveil Russian Twitter users. Twitter ultimately did not agree to Putin's request, as far as I understand. What can you tell us about requests made by foreign governments and the risks that those demands pose? And why would a company like Twitter consider agreeing to a request to censor or surveil users?
I was very surprised and shocked by that one-on-one conversation which I had with Mr. Agrawal. This was prior to his assuming the CEO role. I understand to be it out of a frustration of the inability to perform, and this kind of goes into content moderation, which we talked about before, and while that wasn't my main ballywick, and I've been informed I shouldn't go into details about conversations I've had with Twitter counsel, there was we don't really have the ability and tools to do things correctly. This is a lot of work. It's not, driving our main executive incentive goals. Is there a way that we can simply punt? And since they have elections, doesn't that make them a democracy?
Mr. Zotko, give me 30 seconds. Well, strike that. Senator Grassley is an active user on Twitter. I'll use him as an example. Give me 30 seconds on the type of information Twitter has on Senator Grassley or someone like him.
If I was, if there was somebody, just like what the CTO came to me and said, hey, we've got a problem with this user. Is this user?
Just give me 30 seconds on the type of information
Sure.
that Twitter has on the average Twitter user.
Sure. What's the phone number? What's the latest IP address they've connected from? Are there other IP address they've connected from? Is this the current email? How long have they been using that email with the account? What are the prior emails for it? From the IP address, there's where do we think they live? Where do we think they're connected to right now? Are they still connected even if they're not actively using? What type of device are they connected with? What type of web browser are they using? Which brand is it? Possibly which computer? What language did they connect in it? Those are at some of the front-end systems.
Thank you for that. You're telling this committee that all of the engineers and half the employees of Twitter have access to Senator Grassley's account.
Half of the employees of Twitter are engineers. The engineers are by default given some access to the production environment. If it is, from what I saw, if they wanted to root around in the data and find it, they could find it.
Okay,
and
let me try
I believe
that
some
again.
have.
What half of the employees at Twitter have access to Senator Grassley's account? Is that correct?
Based upon what I saw, technically, yes.
Okay. And if they go into Senator Grassley's account, if an engineer does, for example, Twitter doesn't know that that engineer has done that. Is that correct?
It would be difficult to find the logs showing that, is my understanding correct.
So this engineer who can secretly go into Senator Grassley's account and get all this information, Twitter has no idea what the hell that engineer is going to do with that information, does it?
Under the hood, no.
That engineer could just call one of his buddies and say, hey, you don't like Senator Grassley. Let me give you some information here, and you may want to use it against him. Could that engineer do that?
With the access they have to the
Would Twitter know that the engineer had done that?
Not necessarily.
Okay. Did Mr. Dorsey know all this?
I did explain this to Mr. Dorsey. My understanding is he did not understand this prior to bringing me in, and that was one of the reasons that he wanted.
Does he understand it now from Salesforce? He's the chairman of your board. Does he know all this?
He knows what I put in my reports. I do not know whether he understands it.
All right, you've got an executive from MasterCard, Mimi, I'm going to probably mispronounce the last name, Ali Mayu from MasterCard. Does this board member know that?
I do not know if she knows that.
Well, is this the kind of thing that a reasonable board member would inquire about?
I would think so, but I've also seen that what was presented to the board was not representative.
During your time there, did the board ever ask?
The board did not ask these directly, no.
Even after all these problems with foreign agents?
Not when I was there during the board
They
meetings. I
just
did not
sat
hear that.
there?
They focused on other topics and other
Yeah, right.
priorities.
Dr. Lee, he's a professor at Stanford. Does he know all this?
Same response. I did not see any questions on this specific topic while I was there. in the
Patrick
board meeting.
Pichette, who used to be with Google.
Same response, sir.
All right.
Patrick Pichette? Sorry.
Pichette.
Yeah, Patrick Pichette was the one who, when I brought up this instance, he hit the roof. He was very upset.
Did he
said,
do?
"This is
Did he fix
unstandard."
it?
No, he asked for follow-on information.
And why hadn't Twitter fixed this?
There were other priorities.
It's about the money, isn't it?
It's about whatever crisis and the other priorities.
To fix
correct.
this would cost them money, wouldn't it?
It would take away focus on other
It'd
projects.
cost them money, wouldn't it?
Most likely, yes.
Yeah. Okay,
users' health and safety severely at risk.
Yes, sir.
And it's put the national security severely at risk.
Yes, sir. That was
And
part
its
of my disclosure.
management, the management ought to be certainly restructured, shifted, changed, correct?
Yes, sir.
of exchanges with my colleagues is that the public lacks any credible way to assess whether and how major platforms and technology companies are protecting or prioritizing user privacy. Intentionally remove or modify information that might be especially embarrassing for Twitter. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. I found that very disturbing. The company that I hired, with the knowledge of the other executives and the head of site integrity, which did not report to me, but that this independent organization was going to analyze and do gap analysis. The company reached out to me and said, "Hey, Mudge, Twitter is jumping in and making us open a separate contract and telling us not to provide you the results to your own work, to your own work. This does not feel right to us. What's going on?"
You testified earlier, there's roughly half of Twitter's employees that had unnecessary access to vast amounts of sensitive user data. As Senator Kennedy was asking you earlier, just give us a quick sense of what information Twitter might have about Senator Grassley or about any of us on this committee. And it is deeper and broader, and I suspect if you'd gone further, it then unlocks a whole profile that can give really dramatic insight into members of law enforcement, members of the military, members of Congress, and their families, their travel, their preferences, their actions, their consumer activities. All of that has some real consequences. You wrote in your complaint the Indian government forced Twitter to hire Indian government agents who then had direct and unsupervised access to data. And a former Twitter employee was convicted last August of working as an agent of the Saudi kingdom. How common do you think it is for foreign entities, for hostile agencies, to successfully install sympathetic actors at Twitter, and why might they do so?
Well, if there's any number of reasons, there are many of reasons why you would do so, in particular to not just identify people of interest or track groups of interest, but also to maybe look at whether or not Twitter has identified your agents or your information operations. What other governments has Twitter possibly identified? And remember, outside of the ability to access large amounts of data on the engineering side, you would want to know what Twitter's plan is as far as whether they will cede to your demands for control of information within their environments or not, in order to change different types of political pressure, such as strong-arming. And as we saw, that country was even threatening to put Twitter employees in jail if Twitter didn't change particular activities on the platform.
With 80% of Twitter's users outside the United States, and with Twitter having a deep access and resources to critical leaders in our country and other countries, I think this is genuinely concerning.
You don't have a foreign intelligence officer inside Twitter, you probably aren't doing a very good job as an intelligence agency. Is that close enough?
Yeah, that's close enough, sir. I worked for the government. I held a high-level position. I worked running research and development and programs for the Department of Defense and intelligence communities. And from my interactions with these people and these organizations, Twitter would be a goldmine. From my understanding, from people in the community who focus on foreign intelligence organizations and assets, if you placed somebody in Twitter as I believe that, as we know has happened, it would be very difficult to Twitter to find them. They would probably be able to stay there for a long period of time and gain a significant amount of information to provide back on either targeting people or on information as to Twitter's decisions and discussions and to the direction of the company.
And does that include in Twitter's U.S. offices versus overseas, or is that distinction immaterial given the way Twitter functions?
I believe that's immaterial in both.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
If we could talk a little bit more about the national security risk associated with, for instance, the unregistered Saudi foreign agent who worked at Twitter, or the pressure to hire Indian government agents. Walk us through a scenario of how an individual planted in Twitter like that could create a national security risk for the United States, and if you would, make particular reference to the fact that, at least when I use Twitter, I'm sending stuff out. It's intended to be public. So how, in that environment, can a foreign agent create national security risk of any significant nature?
Yes, sir. There are several aspects to that. There's the non-public information that we've spoken about earlier today, your location, your phone number, your email address, things that aren't advertised to the world. In fact, I believe 200 million, if we want to say regular users, not necessarily from a national security standpoint. Twitter in 2020 internally assessed that they lost information on 200 million users for email addresses, phone numbers, other information like that. This is the information that you need in order to start taking over other people's accounts. With your phone number and an email address, I can hijack your phone number. I can then change your Gmail, your Coinbase, your Ameritrade, your other accounts. I can cause financial harm that way. I can then assume your identity. But more importantly, I probably want to be able to understand your whereabouts, your network, and understand, well, I'll give you an example in foreign governments, a concern, and then we can apply that to the United States. There were requests for information about members in the farmers' protest. There might be organizations or groups in the United States where, once I know your home address and your home phone number, I can approach you in real life. I can put pressure on you. Then I could influence you or target you for influence operations in the real world.
My home address and phone number and email address are pretty widely known, and indeed in the public domain. So how does Twitter access to that information? Is there more, or what's the difference between being able to look me up in the phone book and having Twitter access to that information? Having
been in the public sector myself, yes, a lot of my information became known. There's also a lot of people who are in particular roles where that information is not known. And the targeting of them, perhaps staffers, perhaps aides, perhaps people around you influencing to build that network, which we have seen within, not Twitter, but which the U.S. and the intelligence communities have seen as part of the great game in the intelligence communities and world.
Play that out for me a little bit more, given that so much of this information is available through other channels. What would the end game be for, let's say, a foreign government seeking to put that kind of pressure on somebody who could presumably make a difference or a decision about to the benefit of the foreign country?
Perhaps identifying a relative, a family member, a colleague who is in financial issues or has other elements that can be leveraged against them to help them influence you in a particular fashion without your awareness.
Somebody would be able to create a sort of family or personal network around an individual Twitter user and extract information about folks in that network?
That is one particular aspect that intelligence communities are
how would
known to do.
How would that take place? Through the if somebody's gotten into the Twitter system, how do they find that out?
Well, it might be used in combination with other data collection sources. For instance, one of the concerns of U.S. People traveling to other countries is, was there information in the OPM database? And can that information be cross-indexed against the healthcare industry databases that have been lost? Do we know that this person has a particular political bias on Twitter, and start to tie all of these things together for people of influence or access within governments or within sensitive positions?
Basically, all the cameras that are publicly posted, data on your smartphone, you've already talked about geolocation data, the type of transactions you engage in, where your home is, how much you paid for it. Even Google Earth may have taken a picture of your home or your place of business. So there's already huge volumes of data available for whatever purposes, even above and beyond what social media collects, correct?
Yes, sir. There is a lot of information about a lot of us in many different ways available through technology right now.
Yeah. For example, in 2015, I think it was, there was a hack of the Office of Personnel Management records. I think it was 22 million records of government employees, including their applications for security clearances, was hacked reportedly by the People's Republic of China. And turning to Twitter, you've already talked about the lack of what I would call protection from insider threats in the intelligence community. If you're working in the intelligence community, they have logging protocols that will determine who accesses what information, correct? So it can be audited later on to determine whether there'd been inappropriate access. That's the sort of protocols or mechanisms that were not available at places like Twitter when you worked there, correct?
Yes, sir, correct.
Very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zatko, thank you for being here. Thanks for your testimony.
Thank you.
I want to make sure I got this straight. You've stated today and in your report that about 4,000 Twitter employees are classified as engineers. Is that right?
Yes, sir. At the time, half the employees, I believe there were 7,000 plus full-time employees.
Got it. And that means that these 4,000-ish employees would have had access to live user data all over Twitter. They could access individual users' personal information, including their live data. Have I got that right?
Yes, sir. If they, so they would have access to the production environment. If they spent the time to meander around and look around, they would find that they could access these large troves of data.
Including geolocation data? Did you testify to that earlier today?
I know that Twitter has IP locations and that they do use geolocation services based upon IP addresses.
Wow, 4,000 employees with access to that data. That's extraordinary. So those employees would be in a position then, if they wanted to get this information and dox Twitter users. Is that fair to say?
That is a concern of mine, sir, yes.
Wow. That's a significant concern. 4,000 people with the ability to dox individual users who pick up the phone and use Twitter. That's extraordinary. Have you ever seen it happen?
I have seen numerous situations where Twitter engineers had to patch a problem, and I said, what was the problem? And they said, oh, engineers could tweet as anybody. The data was exposed in this part, and it was always reactionary rather in finding these wounds left and right and putting Band-Aids on them because the systemic underlying problems were not addressed, the broad access to too much information and too many systems.
When you say Twitter engineers could tweet as anybody, tell me what that means.
That meant a Twitter engineer understanding how the running systems and the data flows were operating could then access and inject or put forward information as I mentioned in my oral statement, any of the senators sitting here today.
And have you ever seen that happen?
No, not directly.
Not directly. Are you concerned it has happened? Do you have some reason to believe it may have happened?
The number of cases that were reported to me by individual engineers saying, hey, we found this, I'm going to try and have somebody fix it, where that was the exact problem and we wouldn't know if it had happened in the past, yes, I am concerned.
Wow. I think that's pretty significant testimony.